We talk a lot on this channel about how to make more sustainable choices, but one question that I think often gets overlooked is, well, what are some unsustainable choices? And what does unsustainable living mean if we're talking so much about living in a more sustainable way? So to break down, what are some of those unsustainable practices that are normalized in our everyday life? And what are their environmental impacts? If you're new here, hi, I'm Kelly, and this is my channel Made to Sustain, where I help you make choices that are made to sustain you, your health, and the planet. So let's get into it. Unsustainable living is basically the way of living that doesn't think about future generations or future needs. Short-sighted thinking for us and for its impacts on the planet. Unsustainable living can mean a number of different things, and this list is not all inclusive, but these are just a few ways that are normalized in our day-to-day living that are unsustainable that we can definitely take some steps to change in our daily habits. So the first one, which you may have seen a lot on social media, is overconsumption. Lots of creators now are making content, including myself, about de-influencing you from buying this or overconsumption and why is it such a bad problem. I don't think we really get into what does that really mean, rather than just talking about it and saying it in a really generalized way and just pointing the finger at overconsumption. Buying things that are made in unsustainable, unethical ways that are going to negatively impact your environmental footprint are unsustainable and contribute to overconsumption. So some examples of this that we often do are fast fashion. Fast fashion has a huge environmental impact on the planet and is one of the top ways that you can overconsume, because fast fashion cranks out fashion with producing like 10,000 new styles each year. Consumers keep buying it just to keep up with the trends, and new ones are launched constantly to keep you coming back and purchasing. And these items are often of poor quality and they don't fit you well, meaning you'll only wear them for 1 or 2 times before you end up donating them or giving them away to someone else. And what ultimately happens is that most times they just end up in the landfill because nobody wants them anymore. So fast fashion is just one method of overconsumption. Other things include making impulse purchases. For example, when you go into stores like Target or Walmart and you check out the dollar section for silly little seasonal items that, are cute in theory, but like, are you really going to want a pillow in 2 months from now that just says mustard on it, or something, that you have to buy every season just to keep up with decorating your home? For some people, that's really important to them, but that constant cycle of just buying and buying and buying really contributes to overconsumption. That has a negative environmental impact on the planet, because when we throw something away, it doesn't just disappear, it goes into a landfill, or it gets burned or incinerated, which just causes pollution. So really just think about that when you buy things. Is this going to be something that I'm going to want to use for more than 2 weeks out of the year? Or is this going to be something that I'm going to get tired of looking at it in 2 months? So think about those things. Definition of overconsumption is just buying more than you need, right? This can be things like grocery shopping in excess, people that hoard food, the doomsday preppers who hoard food and just stockpile food in their basements. We live in a world where our food supply chain is pretty secure, and we'll be able to go to the grocery store to buy things that we need when we want them. Not over-consuming, not buying more than we need is the biggest issue. Another aspect to unsustainable living is using things like single-use plastics. Single-use plastics on their own are really terrible. Every time you go to a fast food restaurant, you'll get handed a plastic fork, you'll eat your food, you'll use that fork for like 15 minutes tops, and then it just goes in the trash. What happens when it goes in the trash is it goes right into the landfill. You might think you're doing a good thing by putting it in the recycling bin, but it has food residue on it, so most times it's not going to be able to be recycled. In food labs, we would measure things out and take a plastic spoon, measure our ingredients, throw it out, and take a new plastic spoon and do the same thing over and over again. And this was just so incredibly wasteful that we decided to switch to metal spoons and just rewash them. And also it just reduced our waste an insane amount. It's also just better for the planet. You use it for 15 minutes and then you throw it away. That plastic ends up breaking off into tiny little fragments called microplastics, and we still don't understand the long-term effects of microplastics. They've been found in all places of the world, from the deepest parts of the ocean to the most remote islands. They've ended up in our bloodstreams. Microplastics are everywhere. And they're a really scary thing because we don't know the long-term impacts of microplastics on our health and on the environment. If we can avoid single-use plastics to reduce our dependence on plastic and just reuse what we have, or opt for reusable when possible, it's definitely going to be a better option in the long run. The next method of unsustainable living is looking at things like food waste. I like to think about the people who, somebody goes on a diet and all of a sudden you see them cleaning out their entire fridge and they're just throwing away garbage cans full of perfectly edible food, right? I hate to see that because there's somebody who's hungry who could have eaten that, or restaurants who at the end of the day need to throw out all of their food because it doesn't meet quality standards and they don't want to serve it the next day. But rather than donating it to a local homeless shelter where someone can eat it and enjoy it and have a treat, essentially, things like that contribute to food waste, which is a huge problem and contributes to I think it's 19% of the overall, I'll have to fact check myself, but it contributes to 19% of the overall global emissions. It's pretty darn high just from food that's gone to waste. So food waste is another big one. I've got a whole video on food waste versus food loss. They're two different things, but they're really important to understand the difference between them. So I'll link that here. Definitely make sure you check it out so you can kind of understand the difference between them. The next factor I like to think about when talking about unsustainable living is looking at our dependence on fossil fuels. So yes, it's true, we live in a system that is pretty dependent on fossil fuels, and there's a pretty high barrier to overcoming that. If you live in the United States, we have a lot of car dependency here, and there's not many places that you can live where you're not dependent on fossil fuel to get around. Not everybody can walk to a local grocery store, right? And so it's not exactly feasible for everybody to just get a brand new electric car. There's a big ticket expense there, but our overall dependence on fossil fuel is something we can look at when we're looking at alternative ways to live more sustainably, right? So is it possible for us to walk to the grocery store if you live within a mile? If you're lucky enough to not live within a food desert, is that possible to walk to your local grocery store to buy food instead? Or how about riding a bike? Is that possible? Or to go to your local farmer's market to do your errands? Things like that are a good way to reduce your dependence on fossil fuel, but sometimes it just purely is inevitable, right? Like if we want to go from one end of the country, the United States or North America is a pretty big place. And to get from one end to the other, you really do need to take an airplane. And there's not really any methods of rail transportation that gets you from one end of the country to another in a really efficient manner. So for that reason, it's really important to factor in my environmental impact from one mode of transportation versus another. And the EPA actually has a great tool that you can use to calculate are going to be your emissions if you take a plane, train, or automobile as your mode of transportation and the mileage, and it calculates that for you. So it's definitely a cool tool. I'll link it down below. But recognizing that we live in a system that's dependent on fossil fuels is very hard to change. But when we're looking at the grand scheme of things to a more sustainable lifestyle, our dependency on fossil fuels is quite unsustainable because fossil fuels are a non-renewable resource, meaning we're not going to be able to get them again. Once they run out, they're all gone. And we're running out pretty quick. So as we look towards more sustainable ways of living, that dependence on fossil fuel is going to be critically important to figuring that out. How do we overcome these challenges that we've created within our own system? The last factor I like to think about when talking about unsustainable living is supporting unsustainable companies. There's a number of companies that are doing things well. I've got a whole sustainable brand directory I'll link down below for companies that are doing fantastic, phenomenal things in the world of sustainability and food sustainability. And there's a number of them that are doing great things. But there's also some companies that aren't doing great things. It's one of those companies that just creates fast fashion. They underpay their workers, very, very low wages and long hours. Amazon is another company that overworks their employees, giving them limited bathroom breaks and really having them work overtime. Exxon is another one who really withheld a lot of information, knowing about their impact on climate change for 50 plus years and telling us that we're all wrong about it. There's a lot more companies that I could go on about, but knowing which companies are ethical and sustainable versus which ones are not are a great step in the right direction for understanding how can we support a more sustainable system versus what's just going to perpetuate this problem of unsustainable living. So out of all these things that we talked about, there's a few things to keep in mind for how this is going to impact us, right? So things like deforestation to cut down trees to make room for growing more crops are unsustainable. It also creates water scarcity because there's no root systems to absorb that water. So that can create either like droughts or that can create flooding. It can have two extreme effects. And then soil erosion from not having those roots there to hold things in place, which just contributes to poor soil quality and poor quality resources over time. And then the last one is one that impacts all of us every day, whether we see it or not, but that's pollution and poor air quality. It contributes to things like an increase in asthma rates amongst kids, lung diseases, heart issues, and just breathing problems in general. So unsustainable living can cause all of these problems, right? But unsustainable living can go beyond the examples that I mentioned today. Unsustainable living can really encompass a lot of things, including but not limited to overconsumption, fast fashion, food waste, single-use plastics, our dependence on fossil fuel and resource depletion, and supporting unethical companies. I hope that was a helpful understanding of what is unsustainable living. The choices that you make every day matter. If you're looking for a great way to start making more sustainable choices, make sure you check out my video linked here for my favorite top 10 sustainable swaps that don't cause you to make a lot of sacrifice in your day-to-day living. Comment below which one surprised you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, Made to Sustain, and make sure you check out that video on my top 10 favorite sustainable swaps right here. Thanks so much. Bye.